Here's my plan. Here's my plan of attack. I was going to walk through some slides from a presentation I've done a few times for groups of executives on resiliency, and the ties and underpinnings of emotional intelligence. And I'll describe to you like the point and the goals of the presentation as I made it. And I think it's a really good flow of the highest points, kind of condensed, most important stuff around resiliency that I've found in my work with leaders. So what I was thinking I would do is just go like through one or two slides, pause, and have you all contribute. What else do you know about that? What would you have said? What additional information or context would you have put in there? Or any activities or things that you've done to illustrate those points, right?
Cool.
So what do y'all think of that? Any suggestions, questions?
I like it.
Sounds cool.
I like it.
Hors d'oeuvres.
Hors d'oeuvres.
I like it.
I will now share screen. You can see how we tend to rip off the Microsoft PowerPoint preloaded designs here. All right.
It's legal.
That's what they're there for.
Yeah.
I pay money for Microsoft 365.
Hey, you're just being efficient in uncertain times. So
I'm being resilient.
There you go.
So this is a presentation, like I said, that I have done in some form or another to groups of leaders and recently groups of executives when I kind of go to like a professional association, like manufacturing association or something, where I want to give them some real-time or just-in-time support for all the challenges of 2020. And this has been a pretty engaging topic for a lot of people. What I did was I just kind of thought through all the lessons I've learned around emotions, emotional intelligence, resiliency, discernment, and how can I kind of package the most useful stuff into one set of material that, and I've done this presentation ranging from 45 minutes to 2 hours. So I'm not going to do I'm not going to do the presentation. I'm just going to say kind of here's what I cover. Here's how I flow through it. And again, just pause so that you guys can insert your comments and ideas. So I always like to start by talking about myths that we believe about everything. Every presentation I do, I start with myths. Like we have to disbelieve some of the stuff that we've learned. Many of these myths I have believed, and I see a lot of leaders believing in my coaching with them. So I like to ask, I'm going to ask you guys to actually use the chat function to respond A, B, C, D, or E. Which of the traits or which trait contributes to resiliency? Actually, it's a correlative contribution. So it's not just like, you know, sometimes you could say these things are related, but this trait actually makes you more resilient. Is it A, B, C, D, or E? I see some E's. A lot of E's. B, B. Good. E. All right. So some of you, Paul, Susan, have studied resiliency a little bit. The right answer is B. It is not E. All of these things absolutely do not contribute to resiliency.
What?
I know. So have you all seen the Harvard Business Review series on emotional intelligence? It's a collection of articles called Being Human at Work. And they have a whole collection on resiliency in that series. And so they kind of talk about this there. But first of all, let's figure out why some of these other things are not correlated with resiliency. Grit and endurance. I prided myself in my level of grit as a leader, right? Like nothing's going to knock me sideways. I'm just going to bulldog it through. And I was known for being a bulldog. Like nothing could stop me. And I really prided myself in that. I felt like it was a trait that had served me very well. So why wouldn't that contribute to resiliency?
Because you're only enduring, you're not overcoming or changing.
Absolutely.
You're
Yep.
just living through it.
You're enduring, and you may not be adapting, right? And responding in the way that would be most optimal. And you're going to burn yourself out. If you just keep leaning into grit and endurance and suffering the blows, you're going to burn yourself out. Optimism. Why wouldn't optimism contribute to resiliency? The power of positive thinking. We were all around in the 80s, right?
You're not being realistic enough.
Right. One of the most
Which
important
sets you up for
things.
disappointment.
What was that?
Which sets you up for disappointment.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the most important things they found in resiliency is the ability to see reality clearly and acknowledge this is happening. This is real. I see the complexity. I can assess the risk in it. And optimism was actually found as a factor that contributed to the least resiliency in Nazi Germany in the concentration camps. They did some research on resiliency and found that some of the prisoners who were the most optimistic were also the first to break and give up.
Yeah.
Physical health. Why wouldn't that be a contributing factor?
I guess for me, the obvious is it's more mental health, not physical health.
Yeah. And we could have very poor physical health and be a very resilient person, right? You've probably heard the story of, I think he was a professor, a very prestigious university, he was a big public speaker, and he was hit in his car and became a quadriplegic, just like that. He was very young, active, had kids, and he was being interviewed about 6 months after the accident. And in the interview, they asked, the interviewer was like, "You just seem so upbeat. You seem fine. You don't seem depressed at all. And you went from having full health to being a quadriplegic." And he said, "Well, I used to be able to do about 10,000 things, and now I can do about 9,900 things. And I can focus on the 100 things I can't do anymore, or I could focus on the 9,900 things I can still do." And actually, when we have things happen to our physical body, it can make us more resilient depending on how we respond to it. Does physical health give you a step ahead? Yes, but it doesn't correlate with actual resiliency. Any other thoughts on any of this from you guys?
That's a great conversation starter, because those are all, they can contribute in some way, but it really drills down to what we're going into next. So it's good. I like it.
Cool. And they can all be misapplied, right?
Well, Meg, after obviously discussing it, it makes sense. But I would think if I were educating or mentoring someone, I would tell them that they needed to have all of these characteristics in some optimal value in terms of how to be successful at being resilient. So, obviously after you have gone through the detail, it makes sense. But again, from I guess, an objective thought process, I would think that it would require all of these different things to be resilient.
So that's a good point. I think working on seeing the positives in life and keeping yourself healthy, making sure you have the energy to endure, those are all important. But what I want to do for my clients is make sure that they understand that those things will not make you resilient per se, right? Those are all good things for you, but that's not going to win the battle.
Yes.
And we want you to win. We want you to make the best choices to win. That's success.
And I think too, Meg, when you think about books that have come out about people who have survived horrible things or leaders who have accomplished great things, you hear more about the optimism and the grit or endurance. Like keep your eye on the ball and just don't ever let up. And, but that's not resilience,
Yeah.
right? Because that's not preparing you for, resilience is getting up every time you fall and kind of being like that reed that blows in the wind. You may blow down, but you come back up, right? But I think that we've sort of been conditioned with some of these stories about people to find optimism and grit, the be all end all when it comes to our vision of resiliency.
And our society believes a lot of myths that we perpetuate. And so one of the most important things we can do, especially for experienced leaders, is to bring them important distinctions so that they can start to shift their behaviors to be more successful for whatever they're going for. And in times of stress, I tended to lean into grit and think, well, I'll work harder than anyone. I'm more patient. I'm unflappable. I'm just going to be in it. And that's how I'm going to win. And that's not true. That's not how I'm going to win. That's how I'm going to burn myself out.
Meg, if I could ask, I'm interested to hear what you're going to say about B. I hope that's coming up. Okay.
Yes, it is.
And so I guess I'm questioning some of the things that I have believed and shared with others, and I'm happy to hear you tell me that I've sort of structured this incorrectly, because now that's my concern, that things like endurance, optimism, and physical health are in some ways additive. In other words, in the absence of these, even if I find meaning in adversity, it still may be difficult. All of these help me do be in a particular way or execute after I've found the meaning in adversity. So I'm struggling a little bit, I guess, with maybe breaking down my own conceptions and trying to take on board yours. And maybe I'll just be quiet and wait to see where we go.
Yeah, I've been holding back as well, but I find that, doesn't necessarily mean to throw all of these out, but sometimes, this is a great conversation starter. I mean, already we've just been on the slide for 5 to 10 minutes.
Right.
We're really working through this all as, experts in this. So it's good. So I've been actually kind of just holding off, waiting to see how we dig into B, because we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater with all of these other great attributes,
Right.
But it has been a good conversation starter.
Like if you don't have A, C, and D to some extent and applied in the right ways, your path is going to be harder for sure. But is that the path that's going to win and make you more resilient? No, those aren't the paths to get you there.
Thank you.
Great thoughts, y'all. All right. And you'll soon find out that I am the person obsessed with emotional intelligence. So for me, everything is filtered through that lens. So that's what we're going to dive into now to have a little bit more context. And so I usually tell people, here's what our goal is for this limited amount of time: dispel the myths, help you understand the nature of psychology and emotion and how that plays into resiliency so that you understand what the factors are, and then assess and identify what you can do to improve your resiliency, what research actually says works. What do we mean by finding meaning? How to actually do that. And also, because I'm always speaking to leaders, really cultivating resiliency on your team. So I won't get into that stuff at the end. All right, so shared definition of resiliency: the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties or adversity, toughness. When I have put this slide up, again, this is just pulled straight from a dictionary. People say, well, toughness, that sounds a lot like grit, Meg, right? So what's the difference? What do y'all think? How would you respond to that?
I think it's a difference of semantics, whereas grit is about long-term endurance, whereas this is more speaking to bearing something for a short term so that you can turn it and overcome it. So I think it's the biggest factor in here is the timeline.
Nice.
I mean, honestly, for me, they seem very sort of parallel. So I don't actually know what the difference between toughness and grit would be, because it's sort of like, if I looked at those two words together, I would say they're kissing cousins.
Well, here was my response to that. I used the Padoma method for this one too. You'll know my Padoma method, right?
No.
Love
No.
your Padoma method.
No, but I have a
Very-
feeling we're gonna find out about it.
Yeah.
I remember it well.
Yeah, Herb, this is like ninja level facilitation. So
Yes.
don't feel bad that you haven't heard about the Padoma method. It's the pull directly out of my ass method.
Oh.
No, that's your Meg. We call that the portal. It's not true.
So,
Different.
you know, Meg, I don't know if this makes sense, because I use the term grit a lot in my conversations, in my coaching and conversations, right? And I would say what I see with grit is more of the actionable piece of how you deal with life, while the term toughness, it's an object, it's a situation that is defined as tough. While again, grit for me is just how you function and function well, how you endure, how you go after those tough situations or tough issue or whatever. Am I making sense?
Yeah, actually, I like both of what you guys said better than how I responded.
Well, and isn't grit kind of like digging in regardless?
So yeah, grit is like, I'm not gonna let go,
Right.
right? I'm gonna keep like pounding away at this. So one of the key attributes of great leaders is never, ever, 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 ever give up, right? And that gets you far. It doesn't necessarily make you resilient, because resilient means you recover, right? And adversity doesn't knock you off course. Grit is like, I'm sticking to my course and I can endure anything.
Can I rebut that?
Yeah.
I mean, on a personal note, when I think back to what I've done, yes, I don't give up, you know, and as a martial artist as well, I don't. But I went out there and looked at other styles of martial arts to say, you know, now that I'm getting older, I'm not as strong, I'm not as powerful. So I find ways to counter my opponent's strength, right? So that's where jiu-jitsu or aikido may come into play. The same thing, you know, the term change agent, right? I find that I needed to adjust my style, my personality, or to that culture, or whatever the case may be. So yeah, I'm still gritty, but I'm also making adjustments, because I realize that trying to punch through a brick wall is not the most effective way of getting on the other side.
Right. So maybe in this application, grit is standing there punching in the same way and not getting anywhere. And toughness is, I'm going to stick with it and I'm going to find other ways to do it. But I'm going to stick with it. I'm not going to
Gotcha.
give up.
I'd like to see what came out of the portal.
That's right, David.
She just said it. She just said it,
Grit also has within it courage,
David.
which toughness doesn't.
Yeah, I
That's a good
agree.
point.
And
Agreed.
Janine has a question in the chat about the role of the verb quickly. Does that create a distinction?
I think it's also, you know, the word quickly also is one of those things that they could have all sorts of different meanings and timelines for what quickly equals. So I don't know, that's a tough one.
Subjective.
Yeah, actually, I was
Interpretation.
Really, what I was asking was that it struck me when I read the definition that quickly was in there. And Meg, when you were describing it, you initially said quickly, but in the conversations afterwards, quickly got dropped. So is quickly a distinction of resilience over toughness or grit?
That's what it said in the definition I looked at. but now you guys are pointing this out, it does seem very short-term focused, right? Like I stub my toe, but I keep walking, not COVID hits and I lay off a third of my team. Right? Interesting.
Yeah, actually, I was focusing on recover quickly, suggest you have experienced some sort of setback, and that you have the capacity, as it says, or the ability to be able to come back, if you will. And the word quickly certainly helps that. So but those are the words I was looking at specifically with recovering quickly.
And if you don't recover quickly, if it takes you 20 years to come back from something and overcome it, are you really resilient?
Right.
I don't know if you're still around after 20 years.
Is that resilient?
Be resilient.
Yes.
Well, I think we're about
Just
to
on
get
that,
more
Meg, one of
context.
the things we, Meg, in psychological mental health work, what we find is if someone actually after particularly a traumatic event like PTSD is only defined after 4 to 6 weeks, because we work on the basis is that somebody hopefully could, if they've got resilience and mental toughness, they'll bounce back.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so the definition of PTSD isn't allowed to come into play until after we've actually given the person a chance to see if they can bounce back from a setback.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
It might be interesting to look at maybe in the field of biology or someplace else, if there was some sort of example in there, like cockroaches, right? They've been around for how long? For thousands of years. Are they considered resilient definition?
Yes, they are.
Yes, they are.
Quickly, well, okay, so let's take it a step further and say, how did they fit into that idea of recovering quickly? But I'm just thinking, Meg, that some story or metaphor or whatever from biology or some other area might be a good place. This might be a good place to put something in there for that.
Yeah.
Meg, maybe
Talk to people from New York, they talk about cockroaches coming back quickly.
I mean, I don't know if cockroaches do come back quickly. Like, I don't know if they are resilient. I think that they reproduce quickly and they're tough. But do they adapt to their environment? No. I think other animals adapt better to their environments. So maybe there's a better example from nature.
I think
Well, that can't be true because cockroaches have been around for millions and millions of years. And no matter what has happened on Earth, there have been cockroaches.
Yeah.
That is the joke,
resilient.
that they'll be the only ones to survive a nuclear blast will be the cockroaches.
Yeah.
So
I
I think
maybe
with
one way
cockroach,
to put a time frame on this is, can you come back quickly enough for it to be relevant, right?
Yeah.
Or for you, if you're trying to do something and there's a setback, are you back enough to then still get to where you're trying to go? Because there is a timing aspect of this. I don't think there's any question. So I'm just trying to think.
I think that's a good point, Tommy, that because quickly, you can really misinterpret quickly. It can almost be a kind of sign of some kind of mental illness if you come back too quickly from some trauma or some difficult event. But you can be resilient and recover 5 or 6 months after, or maybe even a year after. Isn't that resilience?
So
You've lost a child or something. Oh, wow. How quick does it have to be?
Is it
called
timely
resilient.
or is it quickly?
Yeah. Well,
Would timely be a good replacement for quickly?
Yeah.
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 Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right.
I just have 2 definitions I found, just in case these are helpful. One says the power or ability of a material. So someone mentioned biology. So this is, I guess, from the world of physics. The power or ability of a material to return to its original form after being bent, compressed, or stretched. In other words, elasticity. And the other is the ability of a person to adjust or recover readily. There's a nice word, readily.
That's a good word.
From illness, adversity, otherwise known as buoyancy. So anyway.
Well, I prefer timely.
Tommy.
So basically our model is Gumby.
Gumby.
Damn it.
Stretch and Gumby, I'm Gumby, damn it. Exactly.
Gumby.
Twist and turn and fold, and he comes back to his original shape.
Nice.
What's sticking with me though is the key distinction we made on the last slide was that you change what you're doing. So it wasn't just bouncing back quickly. It wasn't just enduring as long as you possibly can. It was changing the way you
Yes.
approach things.
Mhm.
And that's kind of covered here with the word recover.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering if we're going to get to that change piece because we haven't spoken about that part.
Yeah,
And I think that's the key part.
we are. I often, when people talk about change management, Meg, can you help us with change management? I get frustrated because change is constant. Like, what do you mean by managing change? Change is physics. Change is life. Change is the way everything is. There's no such thing as no change. And to imply that you're going to manage it, let's think a little more aspirationally here, right? How about if we see change for what it is, and then we can intentionally create change and transform our organization or our team rather than manage, right, something happening from us to us. And that's kind of my shift. And when I talk about emotional intelligence, it's usually around adversity. So, and this says kind of recover from difficulties, which essentially is adversity. It's anything coming at you that's getting in your way from wherever you were headed. You're on a path, something got in your way, you experienced adversity, and it's all in our approach to adversity.
So it's more about managing oneself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Emotional intelligence. Another definition of emotional intelligence is self-management. And emotional intelligence is still a very young concept, and people don't even agree on what all it encompasses. But everyone agrees that it's how you respond to adversity is the metric. So I also like to stop and talk about adversity and our perceptions and our thinking around adversity, because the very way that we think about adversity will make us less or more resilient. So first is adversity, again, it's resistance. It's resistance in your environment to where you are headed on your path. And resistance is needed for momentum and growth, right? So we actually need resistance to learn and get better at stuff. If you are laying on a beach having a margarita, congratulations, but you're not learning and growing, right? We learn and grow when we have adversity and resistance, and we learn and adapt from it. Adversity is absolutely necessary for our growth, progress, transformation, skill development, for us being a better version of ourselves. We need adversity. Can't happen without it. Second, adversity triggers emotions in you. When you experience it, you make a decision about it, you place meaning on it, and that elicits an emotion. And that emotion obscures the very approaches that would be successful for you to choose. And again, adversity, your biggest opportunity for growth. And if we started to see it that way, it would make us more resilient. But the fact that we see adversity and we go, man, I don't want this, right? We throw a hissy fit. I don't want this adversity. I don't want this thing happening to me. This shouldn't be happening. This isn't fair. As soon as we have that knee-jerk reaction and we set in course an emotional response chain, we start down a path of survival. And that path is not the path of success. There are only two paths when we're faced with adversity. Any other thoughts on adversity or how you guys talk about it?
Meg, could you say a little bit more about number 2? I'm making an assumption, and I want to check this with you, that it's triggering emotions that obscure successful approaches, meaning emotions that are not necessarily positive, like I'm not excited about this change, I'm feeling doomed, or
Right.
okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And actually, I have a whole emotion list of here are the emotions of success and successful pathways, and here are the emotions of survival. And when you're in these emotional states, you're not seeing the opportunity, right? Hey, Bug.
Is that your assistant?
Yes.
Oh, what a cutie.
Just woke up from a nap.
So emotion and resiliency. Do you want to go help Daddy with dinner? I'm talking to all these people here.
Hey,
Hey,
hi
bud.
there.
How's it going?
All right. Go ahead downstairs, buddy. Let mommy work a little more. Thank you. Can you take Jocko? All right.
I thought maybe he was the expert on emotional intelligence coming in for the.
Yeah. He's definitely a really great example of
He was a
emotion
guest
at
speaker.
age 5.
That's right. Guest speaker.
So emotional intelligence in a more broader definition is the capacity to be aware of, control, express your emotions, and handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathetically. So emotional intelligence, according to research, is the distinguishing factor in someone's success, right? You can know all this stuff and have all this skill, and someone else knows all this stuff and has all this skill, and one is more successful than the other. It's these skills involved with emotional intelligence. So I talked about the research, right? I'm sure you guys have read some stuff on research. Here's basically what I was able to conclude. In a nutshell, there are 5 things that you can do to make yourself more resilient, skills and practices. And a lot of them are all about engaging your emotions more successfully. So, or not letting your emotions get the best of you and obscure your ability of cognition and discernment in the moment. So the 5 things on the left that I found were 1, face reality like real reality, right? Embrace it, see the complexity of it, acknowledge it. There's the ostrich effect you guys probably talk about, right? What people just, oh, this is yucky, head in the sand. I don't want to look at it. But also facing reality, facing the real reality, not an optimistic version of reality.
Meg,
Second,
is that like just getting that that's what is and stopping the why is this happening? What, you know, get out of the why and get that it is so that you can deal with it.
Actually, I have a whole process on seeing reality that we'll get to. So
Okay.
Good question. Yeah.
Sorry, jumping ahead.
Second,
Meg, just one
yeah.
thought on this thing, reality. Maybe you're going to go there. In my experience, I find that as difficult as it can be for people to see, maybe if you will, kind of the negative, the hard parts, the ostrich impulse, it's often even more difficult to get them to look around to see what they then have to work with, right? What's available to them to keep going forward.
Yep.
And to actually believe that, right? To take that step out of it. So yeah, I think the reality part, but I think in some weird way, we'll see the hard things sometimes more quickly than we'll either believe in the stuff that we have to draw from to keep going.
Yeah. And Tommy, that is a perfect bridge to the second, the thing around meaning and purpose.
Yeah.
So finding meaning in life and your purpose and having a vision for the way things could be different, that's the carrot, right? So if we can't, in the moment, if we can't center ourselves around, okay, well, this is happening. There's all of this inequity and race tension coming up in the world. And my staff now are all having these very heated conversations and getting very pissed off at each other. And people who are less sensitive about race and less aware in a leadership role are looking like real jackasses in my company right now. And now I'm dealing with all this, right? So what is important here to me as a leader? What's my vision for this shifting toward a better place? And who do I want to be in this? And who do we want to be together as a team? These are the questions you ask when you're redefining your purpose in that moment and connecting to meaning, right? What's most important? Who do I want to be in this? What do I want for my team? And that's the carrot that helps you to then see the opportunity. But if you don't even have a vision for who you want to be or what you want out of the situation, then you're very likely going to be in survival mode.
So on that point about vision, I feel like we've been stigmatizing optimism in the last few slides. And I do think that's a really key component to developing that vision. So like, you definitely don't want to be too optimistic with facing reality because you have to see it for what it really is. But that optimism piece is really, really important. I think sets people apart.
So when I talk about this with clients, I talk about having a vision and believing that something better is possible. Not necessarily optimism as like, hey, it's probably going to work out. That's not what we mean. What we mean is there is a better way, and believe in yourself that you could contribute and influence things toward that better way, toward that better outcome. So it's a nuance, but it's kind of an important one, because when people get fixated on the optimistic version, right, of like, well, it's not that bad, and then they start to see the evidence that contradicts that, they give up. Or they really question themselves. I see people turn inward against themselves, right? Of, oh my God, I can't handle this. See, I thought it was going to be okay, and now I'm not the right person for this. I shouldn't be leading right now.
You know, Meg, one of the things that I think about throughout my work experience, my leadership, is that I feel in difficult times, you know, obviously having a plan, I can will things, I can make it happen. And I communicate that in such a format with my team. We can make this happen. This will happen. So I usually use the term. I'm not sure if it's relatable, or is it a part of that definition of optimism. But I use the term will. We can will outcomes.
And there's a lot of power in that. I mean, there's a lot of physics that show once you decide something is going to be, you clarify what you want and you decide that's where you're headed, then it makes it 1,000 times more likely to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So innovate your decisions. That's the Gumby effect, right? Like adaptability, just innovate. Look at the approaches you've been using. Are they working? Admit it when they're not working. Think of new approaches. But you've got to have that vision and purpose as your foundation for that, right? Like if this is my vision and this is who I want to be, are the approaches I'm using aligned with that? Are they aligned with creating a different reality? And are they aligned with me being who I want to be in this? And then I summarize this next one as reprogram your brain. Start to think in different ways, and you can open up those pathways in your brain, because you've got these deeply grooved pathways that are wired into your brain of thinking the exact same shit you thought before about adversity. We are hardwired to think the exact same things. Every day we have 60,000 thoughts. Guess how many are the same the next day? What percentage of our thoughts?
99%.
90%. Yep. 90% of our thoughts one day are the exact same that our thoughts were yesterday, because we're hardwired. When you innovate and you open up and get curious, you actually rewire your brain. But it takes intention to say, I'm going to think differently. I'm going to question the pathways that my brain is taking me down. And then finally, gratitude, highly correlated to resiliency. And that's very, very tied to meaning. But the action step here was actually building a gratitude portfolio. So when you connect to what's important, who you want to be, your vision, to have gratitude for any tiny step along the way that is manifesting that, who you wanted to be and what's important to you and what change you wanted to influence. When you see any tiny success, to feel gratitude for it. And feeling gratitude actually sparks rewiring in your brain. All right. So in emotional intelligence work, we talk about the two paths when you hit adversity. You can either survive and just keep doing the same shit that gets you the same results you've always gotten. And that is what most humans do most of the time, is we're in survival mode. Or you can go into creation or learning mode. I bet a lot of you know, oh yes, good chat. A lot of you have talked about the learning brain or creation brain, right? Where you, when your brain is in survival mode, it doesn't function as well. The signals don't pass between the parts of your brain, and actually your thought patterns are incoherent. In learning mode or creation mode, that's when we start thinking, what do I want? What do I believe in, right? What can I learn from this? What do I have that makes me ready for this? And I'm actually excited to take it on. I feel exhilarated, right? I trust that I am able to handle this. When we're in that mode, our brain fires much more coherently. It's a totally different way of thinking. And it is also your choice. We have a choice when we hit adversity. We can survive or we can create. And there are only two paths: the path of success and creation and learning, or the path of survival when our ego is in control of our thinking. So I like to kind of put these emotions here as a stop and check point of what are you experiencing, what mode is your brain in, and what thoughts come up when you have these emotions, right? When we have these emotions of doubt and insecurity, judgment and competition, we tend to think of solutions to get us out of that stuff. When we're over here in inspiration and peace and wholeness and empowerment and presence, we tend to think about things like, how can I have more of this? How can I restore this? What do I need to learn to bring more of this into my life? So I'm going to pause there and see, do you guys do any activities around this? Do you talk about kind of emotion and cognition, learning modes?
So this reminds me a little bit about the discussion of lack and abundance. You know, that you go into those survival emotions when you are focusing on lack, but you go into the creation emotions when you're focusing on abundance. And so I think that's where the gratitude journal kind of tips the scales there, is that it reminds you of the abundance that you have to help pull you out of that lack mindset.
Yep, good.
I think the only thing I'd say about especially the survival emotions is making sure that you're in touch with them to learn what they're teaching you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, the thing about emotion, especially, and, you know, things like fear and anger in particular, because they're intentional, they're about the world. So they're telling you important things. Now, if you stay there, you're in deep trouble, or you can be. But, and I don't think you were making this opposition, Meg, but I just like, well, so I got to get past the fear. No, wait a minute. That's important to learn that. And then you move back and forth, because we tend to pit emotion against rationality when in fact it's all one integrated system that tells us very critical things about what's going on.
Yep, absolutely. And so often emotion drives thought. And what I like to point out to people is when you're having these emotions, don't make any decisions or place any meaning on anything. Acknowledge the emotion. Right. And shift intentionally onto the other pathway of creation and success, and then start thinking, generate different thoughts.
Yeah, you know, that was
when I was when I was working with physicians and scientists, frequently they didn't know what emotion they felt. They were expressing anger, but underneath it all, they didn't know. They could express anger because they could identify anger. But underneath it, when we got underneath the anger, there was often shame or guilt or fear or anxiety. And those things they had trouble identifying.
Yeah.
So I think that doing some work around survival emotions is really important with clients, because we're not very good at identifying what we're actually feeling.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes we don't want to admit it.
Right.
Or we numb ourselves from it, right? We stuff it down. I
Mhm.
had an executive who really prided herself in compartmentalization. I can just compartmentalize this stuff. I can set it aside and I can go in and be this great executive, and I have this great skill. And I was like,
Right.
let's talk more about that. That sounds pretty gritty to me.
Mhm.
Do you acknowledge the feelings that you're having, and do you revisit them after you set them aside, maybe to function in the moment? Do you revisit and learn? Do you lean into them and listen to what they're telling you?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So Meg, Janice mentioned just now about, did you say scientists?
Yeah, I worked the last 20 years primarily with research scientists and physicians.
Okay, so are you defining that scientist versus, I don't know, a comedian, you know, a truck driver, a teacher? Do you think that their mindset might be different? Or is
No,
it?
I think that very smart people can delude themselves probably very cleverly. And, so when you get down to the basics of what, what's under this anger, I think they're very challenged by it. And
There's a
it's quite
sense
a
of denial. Is that a
revelation to
denial?
them when they do get in touch with things like shame, and they start
Yeah.
talking about that in front of their colleagues.
Yeah.
You know,
Gotcha. But is there a denial path that they're going down?
oh yeah, they have to look good in front of their colleagues. I mean, they're the smartest of the smart.
It's also a lack of skill. Yes, they
Yeah.
have to make the decision,
Oh,
but
yeah.
it takes some skill and practice. These aren't things we're born with. To be able to name your emotion and
Mhm.
hold it without self-loathing or fear, but to say, I am experiencing this, and I can name specifically what it is. Not just anger, but I'm feeling shame and resentment and frustration and hurt, right? To be specific.
Yeah,
And not
I think
run.
that's very important. And
Totally.
what I've found is in my work, Susan knows it, I've talked to Susan about this at length, though, is that in an academic environment where you have such an intellectual competition, the fear is rampant
Mhm.
in very highly qualified professionals who could be world experts in their area. Underneath it, there's this incredible fear.
But is fear promoting insecurity, or is it the other way around?
I don't know. I think the fear promotes insecurity, but I don't know. I don't know how to tease that apart.
Yeah.
But
Well,
where
the
we
way-
would go was working with them on these outbursts of anger, which they were able to tap into their anger pretty quickly, but they couldn't, they were challenged to go beyond that. Okay, so we know you're angry. What's really underneath that?
So Meg, before you respond to that, Susan, can I ask you, what are your thoughts on that? Because, you lived in that space for so many years where these educated individuals, based on what Janice is saying, was that your observation?
It was, and my question was always, how does that tie to self-worth? Because if I believe that my self-worth is tied to my intelligence, then I am going to have fears and insecurities and concerns that people are going to maybe find me out and not view me as intelligent as I am.
Mhm.
And there's a really strong perception that those in higher education, and especially, with the types of individuals that Janice has worked with, that you are to know all the answers, and the more you know, the more value you have within the institution.
Mhm.
So I think
okay.
that self-worth, or that perspective of who do I need to be in order to
Right.
to do these things, that creates doubt and insecurity. And I think it creates a lot of these survival emotions. But I will say that, trying to unpack those emotions and to say, okay, maybe it's layered. On the surface, you're feeling anger, but what's underneath that
Mhm.
is is, because anger is an easy one, right? I know when I'm feeling angry, but am I really angry, or am I frustrated? Am I insecure? Am I anxious? You know, what is driving that anger?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
We
that's
would talk
Mag's
about,
trying to
we
get-
would use the image of, we draw a picture of a jug, like a jug of water, and you have the water line, and out of the top comes anger, and underneath the water line, what's really happening down there? So we were able to have conversations. I say we, because I worked with the lead psychiatrist at MD Anderson. So he's really good at this and at helping professionals, because he's one of them, he's an MD, talk about, okay, what is happening underneath that water line? Where is the, okay, so somebody would say, okay, well, anxiety. All right. So, you know, you could really, it would respond. You could really tease out things like shame. That was the hardest one for all of them, I think, shame. Some sadness, because they dealt a lot with death and dying. So these physicians were carrying heavy emotional burdens that would go on for years, accumulate, right? But they weren't talking about it to anybody or expressing it. Sometimes hostility out of the competition within these research groups. And so we were able to get them to finally kind of fess up to what they're really feeling. And I think it was important. The other thing I want to say is when you work in an environment where it's so rational and you know, rational mind focused, you could really get out of touch with feelings, and they could go wild in organizations.
So they didn't tie back their decisions to include their heart. You know, it's interesting. I can personalize a little bit of that for I think Susan used the word self-worth. And she also brought me to reality about 4 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever the number of years ago, when I stepped out of my executive role. Because I guess within my mind, I was living with the world in which I lived for years. You know, that title afforded me certain things. Right. And when I stepped away from that, but I didn't recognize it until she brought it to my attention. So, so thanks, Susan.
Anytime.
Well, I'll also say, after coaching a lot of people in emotional intelligence, it's much easier to see other people's shit than our own.
Yeah, she made me see my shit.
That's true.
When you were describing your first client related to this slide, Meg, I was like, God, did she coach me? I could totally see myself in what you were saying. You know, that whole compartmentalizing and yeah.
There's definitely themes in this, especially in leadership. The stuff that our ego tells us so that we can feel okay and keep going. The problem is it ends up working against us. It's all over here in the survival emotion area. And when I say ego, I should also say I'm using the purest definition, not the pop science. So ego just being the armor that we have built up over our lives to protect ourselves, that we use when we feel threatened. And going back to what you were saying, survival gets triggered when we feel threatened, right? So any threat in any way to my competence or my security or my image or any threat at all triggers ego. Right? And then we have all these negative emotions, and the ego tries to get us out of that. The ego tries to make us feel better and get us out of pain by fighting, flighting, right? So you know that your ego's been triggered if you're feeling any of this stuff. You're going into self-preservation mode. And 90% of the time, we just stay going down that path. And so we don't learn what we're meant to learn. And the same crap just keeps coming back over and over and over, right? No matter how many times I push reality out the door, it comes in through the window.
So Meg, can I ask you a question?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously the survival emotions, you know, go pretty deep, and a lot of them are obviously in our wiring, how our brains work and things, because, you know, we don't want to be eaten by the, you know, the mountain lion. So I would assume some portion of the conversation is how to, I'm not going to say resist, although that might be right, sort of the auto triggers for survival.
Mm-hmm.
because that would, to me, would be something that would be, for most people, be very hard to do because they don't really have control over those things to some extent. So can you talk a little bit about that?
That's part of the training that I do in kind of emotional intelligence, and Tommy and I were talking about existential intelligence, right? Of what is the nature of existence and how can I align myself with it? Or what some people call spiritual intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Who am I? What is the universe? And how do I align myself with it? And when I coach people through that, I coach them on a specific kind of protocol to what do you do in the moment with the trigger. There's a specific thing you do as a brain hack. And then I move them through a 4-step process after your emotions are calmed down. But in the moment when your emotions are high, your logical functioning is that of a 4-year-old. You're not going to be able to access a whole lot of great ideas, right? If you're emotionally triggered, if you're over here experiencing these things, all you can do in that moment is shift course. Don't do what you would normally do. So I call it the moment of choice. Do any action in the moment other than what you're normally inclined to do. And it's a pattern interrupter in your brain. And then after the situation, after you're calmed down, come back and do some work on it. And then the more we do the work on it and we try to see what is there to be seen, what do I need to learn from the situation? How can I approach it differently? Then we learn and evolve, and those things are not as triggering in the future because we see that it was just a lot of our emotion and distorted thinking that was making us kind of go into that negative emotion spiral. We keep perpetuating it. It's like emotion, thought, spiral, right? That reinforces itself, and we can stop that pattern, but we have to choose to, and then come over here and do some emotional intelligence work. Did I just totally confuse you? Okay.
Are you asking that of everybody, Meg? Or are you speaking to me?
More to you, but
To you, Tim.
Well, no, I think there's what's interesting about it, of course, is, it's funny because I was reading this article about the sound of text messages coming in. And the reason it's so powerful to have you pick up your phone when a text message comes in is because it triggers the same area in the sort of your basic brain that was used as a survival to hear a branch snap in the background. So like, it's almost like insidious in a particular way, right? So this sort of the text message has the same brain reaction that it used to have from primitive times. And that's some deep stuff, right? So it's so freaky to think about how to do that. I mean, part of it is to obviously to sort of try to change the behavioral reaction, I think is what you were saying, Meg, so you keep doing something, you keep trying to change the reaction. So do anything but that reaction, but it's pretty deeply ingrained. And so it's, and to see that article about the fact that this is why text messages become hard, that ping becomes hard to resist is almost like sinister in a particular way. So I don't know. It's just
you're referring to the limbic system, right? And the amygdala of the emotion center of our brain, the reptilian or lizard brain back here.
Correct.
And it is far more powerful than the rest of our brain.
Right.
And most of our brain energy and activities back here, quite a lot of the time, and not up here in our frontal lobe where logic happens.
Right.
And we have to actually decide to move our brain energy from back here to up here. It's an intention. It's a choice to be present and conscious.
So you didn't confuse me. I'm just continuing to sort of ponder that shift, the behavior. I mean, it's sort of like funny because when we started, some of the people are talking about their sort of experiences with the different types of audiences that they might be talking to, and what I think is, I think everybody should be required to do about 6 or 7 years of therapy to get into that particular place, because that's what you work on, right? So,
yep, self-awareness. So here is where I get into giving people step 1, step 2, step 3 a 3-step process for resilience. And this is pulling portions of my emotional intelligence coaching framework, just parts of it. So step 1, harness emotion. Okay, I'm feeling emotion. I'm going to use it as a road sign. I'm harnessing it, and now I'm going to see reality. So step 1, look past your shit. Look past all the survival type thoughts that you're having, right? Distorted thinking, and ask yourself these 3 coaching questions. And I drill people on these. So first is, what is really happening? Not that defiant adolescent self in your mind that's like, how dare thee, and how dare this person do this, and he's such a sexist, and I know that this is going to happen now, and blah, blah. Okay, what's actually happening in rational reality that a robot would see, that a robot would view, right? What's really happening in its essence, and all that other stuff is thought distortion, the stuff that I'm making up. So I teach people about thought distortions and how to identify them so that you know, if I'm thinking along these lines, I'm fundamentally up in ego survival mode and I'm full of shit. I'm distorting reality. This is my sign that I'm doing that if I'm having any of these thought distortions. So I teach people how to identify that. And then your thought distortions are pointing you toward your ego needs. Your ego is trying to protect you because you felt threatened. So let's identify that irrational fear that was triggered by this adversity that spiraled you into these thought distortions. For example, if you're personalizing, let's say I'm an executive and my VP just came and told me, you know, you made a statement at the staff meeting and people felt like it was racially insensitive. One way I could respond to that would be, oh my God, I'm such a terrible person. I'm not a good enough leader. I'm not aware enough. Take it personally. That's actually a thought distortion. Another reaction I might have would be to label. This person is judgy. They're always judgy. And actually, they're totally sexist. And oh, I'm just not going to listen to them. Labeling is a thought distortion. Catastrophizing. Oh my God, people think I'm racist. The board is going to fire me. I'm going to be discredited professionally forever. I know exactly what's going to happen, right? This little thing means this whole thing is going to blow up. Catastrophizing. So those are examples. I kind of walk people through and train them in what are these thought distortions and how can you identify when you're using those in the back of your brain. And if I'm personalizing, like, oh no, I'm not a good enough leader. I'm not aware enough. I'm probably totally insensitive. I shouldn't be leading. Then my ego need is to feel competent and feel like a good leader. And that was just threatened. And so my irrational fear would be, I'm going to be seen as an imposter. I'm going to be discredited. And this is how we can start to strip away all that stuff that's stopping us from seeing reality. And if we want to be resilient, remember, we need to see reality for what it is and strip away the veil of distortion that's created by our emotion, by negative emotion specifically. All right, I'm pausing.
Yeah,
what can you add to that?
So last month, Paul Saunders introduced us to the concept of ants, the automatic negative thoughts, which share some of these same tells, I guess, as thought distortions. And so I'm wondering if maybe you and Paul can talk a little bit about the different. Is it the same thing, or are there differences between an automatic negative thought and a thought distortion?
Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, look, thought distortions often occur when ants are running in your head. Yep. So catastrophizing, often a common factor when people are going through emotional crisis, or unfortunately, if it can become a habit, a pattern, like Meg's highlighting, that sometimes needs to be addressed, and shows a lack of probably ability, emotional intelligence to take perspective. You just get caught in a loop. So.
But is that just when an emotional crisis is coming into play, or is it where someone is just having a difficult time? You know, one's ego is involved, the brain as before, Janice was talking about those smart people, they would be just thinking it from an objective standpoint and not necessarily tying it back to their emotions. So what is that, Paul? Is it the crisis portion of that, or is that also applicable to day-to-day activities?
Day-to-day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like day to day.
I mean,
Absolutely.
these thought distortions, once I train people in identifying them, and it's any adversity, Herb, it's like I'm 10 minutes late, or my kid won't put on a shirt, or I'm looking for something in the refrigerator and it's not there.
Yeah.
Our next thought is often distorted if we feel a negative emotion. And once I start training people in identifying thought distortions, they come back after a couple of weeks and they're like, oh my God, I'm totally full of shit.
Yeah.
All the stuff that my brain is generating is so messed up, but it's like most of what I think. And that is someone whose brain is wired to go into those automatic negative thoughts very unconsciously, subconscious, and immediately, without second guessing it and just assuming that the meaning their brain is spinning is right. And the first thing we have to do to see real reality is to not automatically believe every thought our brain spins.
Gotcha.
Other thoughts, questions? This is fun.
So, yeah, there's another thought for me. You use the example with an executive saying, oh yeah, you know, and just because social justice is on my mind constantly these days, Meg, you mentioned before about an executive saying, oh yeah, they're going to think I'm racist or whatever the case may be. Is that, again, also another denial factor?
So the specifically labeling, personalizing, they're just incomplete usually. So thought distortions tend to simplify things to be, it's this way or it's this way, and we don't see all the complexity and nuance, right? Like labeling someone as a racist. Is anyone just a racist? It's not that simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've all been steeped in a culture full of racism. We all have to do the work of finding those hooks within us that we believe that culture taught us about race, about the difference, right? So is anyone a racist? But labeling kind of lets our brain off the hook from complex thought. So a lot of thought distortions are really just sort of not seeing the full picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Meg, I don't know if this is helpful. From my own experience, I think one of the things, I hope this doesn't sound crazy, but one of the things that I think thought distortions help me do is feel like I figured it out. Because in uncomfortable situations, I want to know.
Oh yeah. Wanting to be right is like
I have
ego's
created,
#1 trick.
yeah, I have created an answer, right? That happens to be a distortion, but damn it, it's an answer.
Yeah, it makes you feel better.
Right?
The ego wants you to feel better, right?
There you go.
I am superior then, or I am just purely a victim, or I know the exact right way. My way or the highway, there's no other option. It just makes us feel better.
You know, Meg, the thing that this reminds me is in looking at all this, one, totally love the idea of naming these things because I think we have such an impoverished emotional vocabulary, but also how much our virtues can so quickly become our vices, right? So, I mean, these are habits of thinking, which when they're positive, good. We don't have to reinvent these every time we meet. That's like what expertise is like, I have positive thought distortions. They're distortions because they're a take on the world that allow me to function really, really well. These are the ones that get in the way. I mean, that's the thing that fascinates me about this. Like, we're so good at doing certain things that it totally jacks us up. Because, you know, actually sometimes maybe it's actually a catastrophe. So if I'm good at recognizing catastrophes and my job is to keep people out of catastrophes, that's positive.
Yeah.
The issue is, when is it not, right? When does
Exactly.
it become a problem?
When is our ego overactive, right?
Right.
And stepping in where it shouldn't be, which is most of the time. If you're not getting chased by a bear, right? Or the roof isn't falling on you right now, and you're feeling threatened in a stress response, you don't need that. It's not helpful. What we need is to be able to discern what is happening, what is really happening in its complexity. And a lot of the reason we don't see all the opportunity is because we get embedded in this distorted thinking that's simplistic and shallow. So, ready for step two? Step two in this process is, I say, putting my higher self behind the wheel. Your ego's been driving. Your ego is driving if you're in survival mode. Let's put our ego in the back seat, blindfolded and gagged, and our higher self gets behind the wheel. Our higher self is that part of us that knows who we are. We live on purpose. We have values. We live by those values, and we want what's best, and we are of service, right? We're integrity-driven beings, and we have a higher self that is unique and wired to do great things in this world. And the three big questions when we want to, again, connect to meaning, put ourselves in the higher self framework is, what's my vision for this situation being transformed toward my ideal? What would it really look like? So if my adversity is that my husband continually won't clean up after himself or cook dinner, the ego response is labeling him as a sexist jerk or personalizing, I'm terrible, I'm not a good spouse, I'm not a good mom. Or I could step into my higher self, just step around those ego-based thoughts and think, who do I want to be as a wife? What do I want for my relationship? What's important to me? What inspires me? Who do I want to be in this marriage? And then we might find that we don't quite have a vision for that and that we need to think about that, right? And second question, what is my purpose? So what's my vision for the most important parts of the situation being better, but also who do I want to be in this situation? What's my why? What kind of a boss do I want to be? What kind of a wife do I want to be? What kind of a mom do I want to be in the face of adversity? And then what are my guiding principles that I know if I live by these, things work and I feel good about myself, because I still have to wake up in my own skin every day. And these are the three questions I ask my clients to connect to meaning. Thoughts here?
I love this. One of my reactions is that, when I am able to ask these questions, I have gone from my lizard brain to my prefrontal cortex. So it's consciously engaging the part of me that is the higher self, right? Yeah, it's awesome.
So, Meg, what I'm thinking also is that, which I don't see the word communication. It seems to me it's not just a matter of putting yourself to your higher self, if that's the right term, but you have to engage someone in a conversation to get to your higher self.
That's step three.
Okay.
Don't jump ahead her.
Sorry.
I love the visual of putting your higher self behind the wheel. I think that resonates really strongly for me. And then all of those questions kind of just flow into that. So if my higher self is behind the wheel, what questions am I asking them before we take off down the road, right?
Plus, it's a great country song.
With the dead horse and the wife cheating on? No.
Sorry, Meg, I couldn't resist.
We're in Texas.
He's just practicing Padoma.
Hey.
Another very similar analogy to this is the elephant and the rider that Jonathan Haidt came up with. And so that one really resonated with me. This really kind of follows along that. So if anyone's looking for additional reading, Jonathan Haidt is the author and really kind of works through this and then takes it to that, I guess, that decision making and how you actually, like the elephant is the big subconscious, and you're the rider putting yourself, instead of behind the wheel, putting yourself on the shoulders and incentivizing that elephant and kind of guiding its path. Because, you know, those survival instincts, it's just so innate with us. You know, they're not necessarily adversarial, but you can use those creative instincts to sharpen those survival instincts.
What's the name of that?
To the point about like stuffing all of that, I think part of the reason we do this, to your point, David, we see them as being wholly negative, or and you're not saying this, Meg, but we quickly want to jump and suppress them and control them. It's like, no, it's all part of being human. Now we have to, I'll look that up. I love that image. That's right. So we don't.
Is that HYDE, David?
HAIDT.
Yeah, David, can you just pop that into the chat?
Sure can.
Thank you.
You know, it's like, we don't know how to talk about religion and politics because we never talk about religion and politics.
Right. This is not Texas, right?
Okay, Mom.
I actually did try and figure out if there was a way to not have emotion anymore. Was there any kind of a process I could follow to no longer have emotion? And
did it work for you, Meg?
I quickly found out that is not possible. I also tried to figure out if there's any way to not have an ego. Is there any way to fully deconstruct your ego so that you don't have a survival response? And from what I have gleaned, that is pretty much the definition of enlightenment. Very few people get there. And the people that self-proclaim, I am enlightened, I no longer have an ego response, the ego is still there. It's just silent. And you can always kind of hear it echoing. They can never take it fully away, but it's more like an uncomfortable suit they wear, an uncomfortable costume that they kind of put on to interact with the world in the way that you're supposed to interact. But it feels artificial. And that's about as good as we can get as far as ego and emotion. Because I learned all this stuff and I was like, well, how do I obliterate both? How can I just not have emotion if it's clouding my rationality? Or how can I just destroy my ego? So I am working on obliterating my negative ego. I'll let you know how it goes.
There was a quote I heard years ago, sort of to that effect, Meg, and I can't recall who it was, but I will find it for you. It said, be in it, but not of it.
Exactly.
Right. And so it's that staying in and exploring and seeking to understand, but also sort of being a conduit and allowing all of those negative emotions to pass through you as part of that process so that you can let them go and return to that creative side. Yeah.
I've heard it called being the conscious observer. I'm a conscious observer of my life. I don't get sucked into it. I am conscious and aware and I observe, right? But I don't engage.
Yeah.
I don't get swept away. Good. Okay, so step 3. Here you go, Herb. Innovate and create. Choose wise integrity-based actions. I always tell people, first of all, what's integrity? Because my version of integrity might look really different than Susan, right? So integrity is essentially, I'm following my inner moral compass. So everyone's got a different moral compass. For all I know, President Trump might be fully in his integrity. He may wake up in the morning and live all day thinking, I am doing awesome. I am doing everything that I was meant to do in the best way I can. I'm doing right by this country. So my litmus test for integrity is it a win, win, win? Is it a win for me, win for the other people involved, and a win for our environment? And if you can say yes to all 3 of those, then you're in your integrity. And the questions to ask, or kind of the process to go through, is, first of all, we talked about this, but be present, right? Okay, here I am in reality, fully conscious, and I want to be alert. I want to be aware of what's actually happening, and I want to be accurate about it. And from that place of presence and AAA, I want to use discernment and not judgment. When you're coming from a place of judgment, you're still in ego-based thinking. Judgment being more emotional, right? And more just judging other people so that I can feel better, judging the situation, having opinions, right? If you're still having opinions, then you're not in discernment. And all of your opinions are just going to generate action steps that are not integrity based. So use discernment. Discernment is, what can I learn and do and be and create here to move it forward? That's discernment. And then stand in the face of your fear and just rewire your brain. Don't go down the pathway your brain wanted to go down. And think back to what your irrational fear was when you were seeing those thought distortions, and just stand in the face of it. So if I have someone coming to me, my vice president, telling me that I said something racially insensitive, and my fear is being discredited as a leader, then I might stand in the face of my fear and say, help me to understand, right? I'm not sure that I'm doing the very best thing. I'm just trying to do the best I can, but I know I need to learn. Help me learn, right? That's standing in the face of your fear. Thoughts?
So I just have a funny story about standing in the face of your fear.
Awesome.
When I had my place out in Dripping Springs, I had the front pasture leased out, and the people who had the lease put a very large cow and her calf onto the property. And one day when I drove through, the cow and the calf came into the area around the house. And so I called them and I said, your cow is a lot bigger close up than she is when she's out in the field. And I am here by myself. And so I want to get her back out in the field. How do I do that? And she said, oh, that's easy. Just go cut up some apples and, put them in a bowl or in your hand, and then, walk her back out. And I said, okay, but she's much bigger in person up close than she is out in the field.
Cows are big.
So I went out there with this bowl full of apples, which once she saw them, she came running. And I'm backing up, walking her out into the pasture going, face your fears, face your fears, face your fears. Because I thought, and I was praying that I was not going to trip. But it did rewire my brain, because I thought after that, okay, I can handle this. This isn't as scary as I thought it was going to be. And I'm bouncing back faster than I thought I would. And all that, but it was like the physical manifestation of facing your fear.
Congrats, Susan.
Face your cows, face your cows, face your cows.
It was just, don't turn your back on her, because she's a lot bigger than you are.
Yeah, that's true.
Meg,
Did the calf follow along as well?
I imagine it might.
Yeah.
Meg, could you drill into the second one, the discernment versus judgment?
Yeah, so what I'm trying to do is point out areas where people, when they're trying to pick that action, right, and pick, okay, what do I want to do that's different and not survival based? People stumble here. So especially, again, pertaining to leaders, if the action you choose is still coming from a place of judgment and having a lot of opinions about everything and trying to fix stuff, it's not integrity based. You're still back in that ego space. So judgment being, okay, well, my house is always messy, right? And that's my adversity. And my husband is sexist. He obviously thinks because I'm a woman that I'm going to clean up. So my integrity-based response is going to be to help him see his sexism and to make sure that I create a giant spreadsheet that I'm doing 50% and he's doing 50% to make sure it's fair, right? So that is, you're not on the path of discernment. You're still on the path of judgment.
Yes.
That's great. Now, I was looking through my notes because I recently just read something, and it kind of goes back to the first 2 points. And there's, when you express your belief versus expressing truth, like a lot of people talk about speaking your truth versus speaking your belief, like beliefs aren't always based in like real truth, which is verifiable and replicable. And so you can actually have the best of intentions and, you know, pushing your beliefs, but your beliefs could be based in, you know, something as simple. It's not even like your beliefs are rooted in something evil. It could be rooted in something that lacks context. You know, it doesn't always have to be, you know, evil. So that's just something that's been on my mind. I wish I could find my notes on it, but it would be a good point, you know, if you know, you're drilling into this and to kind of discuss that difference between beliefs and actual truth, which is, you know, verifiable, replicable, you know, something that you can actually say is true.
You know, interestingly, David, that's what we're going through right now with this politics.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these folks on either side, in many instances, they're not dealing with truth, right? They're dealing with a lot of their conjured up whatever, whatever their feelings and their reality might be. So,
and the best people with the best of intentions do the stupidest shit over and over, right? All of us here on this call having been in that situation. So what I try and do with these kind of coaching questions is figure out where people get tripped up on the step and then help them see, are you really picking the integrity-based move? I know it feels like it, but you might still be slipping back into that old approach that doesn't work for you and is not going to help you overcome this. It's not resilient.
So we have about a minute left. Any closing thoughts, Meg?
I think I got through everything, actually. I'm not sure how we did that perfectly on time. I think part of the power of this for me is to help people see we're all in the same boat. It's not our fault. We're not shitty leaders. We're not shitty humans. This is how your brain works. This is neuroscience, right? This is psychology. It's a set of skills. You can master it. And here is where I see people get slipped up and have tried to create structures to help guide people through it.
yeah.
It's just practicality. Right?
Yeah, great.
Nice job, Meg.
Thank you. Thank you all. This was a great discussion. I learned a lot.
Thank you so much for sharing the materials with us, Meg, and your wisdom. And thank you all for sharing everything, you know, your ideas, your thoughts, what you've done before. That's the whole purpose of these events. And so next month, we have Paul and Tim, who will be talking with us about the power of play and introducing us to a process that they use to help uncover issues and challenges within organizations. So I think I like how this is flowing from Paul Saunders' talk with us last month, and then into Meg's about resiliency and emotional intelligence, and then on to, so how do we now uncover things within organizations and use everything that we're learning so far to go deeper into that work. So thank you, Meg, again.
Can I say one thing before we go, Susan?
Of course.
I didn't mean for this because I've got multiple workstations all over, but Paul, like I ended up with a totem of my own in the background.
Oh, Jesus.
It's been on my garage wall for years.
And he had to drop off of the
call.
call.
I didn't see he dropped off already.
Next time around, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Hey, Susan, and,
Yes, sir.
And thank you for organizing this. Awesome.
Thank you. Well, if anybody wants to speak in February, let me know. That's our next opening available slot. So
Thanks, Meg.
Everybody take care. And listen, fingers
take care.
crossed.
Stay safe.
Stay resilient tonight.
Bye.
Bye.
Have fun. Take care.
Bye-bye.